In this video, we'll show how you can use a Genie to create a REST API to expose database tables in your own database. So Alpha Anywhere has had an ability to create an arbitrary REST API for some time now, but now basically you can use a Genie to automatically generate an API that is specifically meant for accessing data from a SQL database. So let's go ahead and see how this is done. So I'll go to the web services section here. I'll click on new. I'll say I'd like to create a new REST service, and now I get this dialog saying what type of REST service. Do I want to start with an empty service, which is what was previously available only, or do I want to use a Genie to create a service to expose database tables? And this is going to allow me to select the database that I want to expose, the list of tables and views I want to expose, and the type of operations I would like to expose. So I'm going to go ahead there and say use the Genie, and then here is the Genie. So I'll first start out by selecting a connection string. I'll choose Northwind, and then I'll go and choose the list of tables in that database that I'd like to expose. So I'd like to expose, say, customers, say, orders, order details, products, and say suppliers. Then I'll go ahead and click OK. Then for each of these tables that are exposed, I can choose what operations I would like to create API endpoints for. So I can basically, let's go here and select all, and then set properties here. I'll basically go and select all. So what I've chosen over here is the ability to do to create an endpoint for the customers table to select data, to update data, to insert data, to delete data, and to get a schema, etc. So now I'll just go ahead here and call this, give my service a name. I'll just call it Northwind, and then I'll press OK. And now Alpha Anywhere will generate the service definition, and it'll also generate the XBasic class that backs this service. So the service has been created now. You can see there it is showing up in the control panel. And then I'm going to go ahead now. It says, would you like to test it? So currently my server is not running, so when I say I'd like to test it, the server is started, and then we're going to basically launch the Swagger test page to test the service. So here is the test page for the service, and you can see that all of the endpoints that I selected are listed over here. So if I want to go ahead now and, for example, test the customer's select endpoint, I'll click on post over there, and then I'll basically click on try it out. And so here is the post body that needs to be supplied. So what we're asking for over here is a string, which is a comma delimited list of fields. So I'll say customer ID, contact name, city, country. And then I can leave all of the other arguments unspecified, but if I wanted to, I could specify a where clause, an order by clause, arguments in case I use arguments in the where clause, a page size and a page number. So since I haven't defined any of those, we're going to return all the records that satisfy our query. So I'll go ahead there and hit execute. And now you can see that there is the curl statement that was used to generate the API call, and here are the results of the API call. So we can see there were 87 rows. We don't have pagination turned on, and there is the data over there. So what we've shown over here is how easy it is to create an API to expose data from a database. And not only can you do selects, but you can also do updates, inserts, and deletes, and also get the schema, which we'll cover in the next video. In the previous video, we showed how you can use a Genie to create a REST API that exposes data from a SQL database, and we showed how you can do a select, and this is the result of the select. So if we look at the data here, we see that there's clearly something that needs to be updated, because this customer Alfke is currently set to city Boston in the country Germany. So let's go ahead now and use the API to update the city for elf key. So we'll go back here to our tester over here, and we'll close customer select, and we'll go over to customer update, and we'll click on the try it out button over there, and then we'll go field value pair. So we want basically city equals, and we're going to use an argument this time. So I could just type in, say, Bon. So basically you can type in name value pairs that are comma delimited to define which fields you want your update statement to update. So I only want to do an update against city, so I just don't specify any additional fields. But I don't want to use a literal value there, so I don't want to. So I'm going to go here and say colon C what city. So this is an argument that I'm using right now, and the syntax for arguments are always start with a colon, and then in this particular implementation, you specify the data type of the argument first with a single character. Oops, sorry about that. With a single character, then an underbar. So this means that the what city argument is a character argument. So we'll go there and we'll say that C underbar what city equals, say, Berlin, and my where clause here is going to be customer ID equals, and I'll say C underbar ID, and then I'll go here to my arguments and I'll say C underbar ID equals elf key. So I'll go ahead now and hit the execute button. So there's the curl that is generated, and we can see now that our response is that there were no errors and that one row was affected. So what we've done right now is execute an update operation against the customers table. You can also execute inserts and deletes, and you can also get the schema of a particular table. The schema will return the field names and the data types and data and size of each of the columns. In the next video, we'll show some of the code that got generated by the Genie. In the previous videos, we've shown how you can use a Genie to generate a REST API that exposes data in a SQL database, allows you to do selects, updates, inserts, and deletes against the database. So in this video, we'll take a look at the service definition and the XBasic class that were generated by the Genie. So you can see here that we're in the web services category here, and there is the service that was generated. If we go to the XBasic category, we can see that an XBasic class was generated, and the class is called SQL CRUD dot then the name of the service dot A5XB class. So let's go now and explore these two files. So if we go back to web services and double click on the builder here, we can see that the service definition appears over here. So all of the methods in that XBasic class that are exposed have a little green icon next to them, and then the lock icon indicates that each one of these API endpoints has authentication, even though we haven't really used authentication. So then we can go here and we can see that if we go, for example, to say the customers select, we can see that basically that this method takes these arguments. We can see that basically this endpoint has been exposed as a post option, and that the method has been authenticated, and the name of the authentication API is going to be customers select authenticate. So here are all of the named authentication methods, and those named authentication methods are defined over here. So for example, the customers select authenticate method has been defined by a class, by a method called customers underbar select underbar authenticate that has been defined in the SQL CRUD Northwind class, which was generated by the Genie, and that the argument name for this method is going to be supplied in the query string when the API call is made. So let's now go and take a look at the XBasic class. But before closing this, you'll see that now that I've opened up the builder, I can live test again. I can generate a Swagger definition, and I can also generate documentation for this API. So let's go now to the XBasic class and edit that. And we'll see that in this XBasic class here, there are methods that have been generated for each of the selected tables and for each of the selected operations. So for the customer table, we selected to expose a select, an update, an insert, and a delete operation. So if we go, for example, to customers select, we'll see that here is the definition of that method. But the method turns around and calls a generic method called SQL, called select underbar generic, that we did not expose. So this select underbar generic was not exposed. But if we go and take a look at select underbar generic, we'll see that this is the XBasic function that basically accesses the SQL database. So this is just a standard XBasic expression that uses alpha DAO to execute a query against a SQL database. So you can basically make any changes that you want to this code. And then we can also see that the function that is used to authenticate this would be, say, customers select authenticate. So this function currently basically has an API key which is currently marked as optional. So if you wanted to turn authentication on, you would change this from optional to be required by making this API key as C, and then the authenticate function must either return a 200, which is allowed, or a 401, which is denied. And in your code over here, you would take the value of the API key that was supplied, and then you would basically write your own XBasic that determined if the API key that was supplied allowed a select statement against the customer table to be performed. If it didn't, you would change that to a 400. Thanks very much for watching.